Our next step in the assembly is to install the flywheel, the cooling fin, and the part of the recoil assembly. In order to install the flywheel, first we must remove the coil, and to do that you'll need a 10mm socket, and you're going to remove these 2 bolts. Before installing your flywheel, you'll need to install your half moon key into the crankshaft. Once the half moon key is in place, when you install the flywheel, you want to make sure that the slot in the flywheel lines up with the key on the crankshaft. Once your flywheel is installed, you're going to install the cooling fins onto the flywheel and install part of your recoil assembly. Once they're in place, you can install your nut. According to our torque specification sheet, we want to tighten the flywheel nut to 44 foot-pounds. Using our torque wrench set at 44 foot-pounds and our strap wrench, we're going to tighten this nut up to 44 foot-pounds. To use the strap wrench, you're going to place the cloth part of the wrench around the flywheel and set it up like this so that you can hold the flywheel from turning. Having your partner hold the flywheel wrench, you will tighten up the nut. Again, when you're using the torque wrench, make sure you turn it until it clicks. Once the flywheel nut is tightened, you're able to reinstall your ignition coil. When installing the ignition coil, make sure that the magnetic part of the flywheel is turned away from the coil. This will make installation easier. Once your ignition coil is installed and the bolts are still loose, you want to turn the magnet of the flywheel so that it is away from the coil, and using the 0.4 millimeters or 16/1000ths of an inch feeler gauge, you're going to place it between the coil and the magnet on the flywheel. Once the feeler gauge is between the magnet and the coil, using your 10mm socket, you are going to tighten up the 2 bolts. You can remove the feeler gauge after the bolts are tight. Once your flywheel and coil are installed, you can remove all bolts that hold the shroud on. Before installing your shroud, be sure to install this shield that goes right behind the flywheel. You'll line up these 2 bolt holes with the bolts on the engine. Once the shield is in place, you can carefully install your shroud without putting any of the 2 bolts in that hold the shield in place. Before installing your shroud, make sure that the shield is in place next to the flywheel, and as you install the shroud, be sure the wires for the spark plug are out of the way. The wire should fit into this slot in the shroud. Once it's in place, you can reinstall the 4 bolts that hold the shroud on. Once all 4 bolts are in place, you're going to tighten these bolts up. After your shroud is in place, you can remove the 3 bolts that hold the recoil assembly on and install the recoil. Using your 8mm socket, adapter, and extension, you can tighten up your recoil bolts. Be careful not to over tighten your recoil bolts, as they only screw into a tin shroud. The recoil and shroud are assembled. Your next step is to install the carburetor, and that'll be on your next video.